It was one of those evenings when the sky seemed heavier than usual, filled with dark clouds that pressed down on the streets and buildings. Rain had begun to fall in soft, persistent drops, turning the roads slick and reflecting the glow of streetlights like scattered pieces of broken glass. She was walking home after a long day at work, carrying a small bag with her essentials. Her shoes were wet, her coat clung to her body, and her thoughts wandered to the warmth waiting at home. It had been a tiring day, filled with endless calls, meetings, and a sense that no matter how much she did, it was never quite enough. As she moved along the familiar street, her mind focused on nothing in particular. The rhythm of the rain against her umbrella was almost soothing, a tiny comfort amidst the bustle of the city around her. People hurried past, huddled under umbrellas or jackets, all lost in their own worlds. Then out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement near a dimly lit corner. A figure struggled with something, a bicycle from the looks of it, stuck awkwardly on the wet pavement. Curiosity mixed with concern, and without thinking much, she stepped closer. The figure was a young woman, probably a few years younger than her hair damp and sticking to her face. The bicycle was tilted at an odd angle, one of the wheels crooked and caught in a puddle. The young woman's expression was one of frustration and helplessness, her hands slipping on the wet handlebars as she tried to set the bike upright. "Do you need some help?" she asked gently, not wanting to startle her. The stranger looked up, her eyes wide for a moment, and then she nodded quickly, almost as if she had been hoping someone would come along. I don't know what happened. The wheel it won't turn right," she stammered. Her voice was soft, but there was a quiet urgency in it, a sense that she had been stuck there for a long time. Without hesitation, she knelt down and inspected the bike. The wheel was indeed stuck at an odd angle, probably from hitting a pothole or some hidden obstacle in the slick street. She could feel the rain soaking through her coat as she worked, but it didn't matter. Something about this moment, about being able to help someone, made the discomfort fade. "Here, let me try," she said. She adjusted the wheel, pushing and pulling gently, careful not to damage the bike further. "Okay, I think it's better now. Try turning it slowly." The stranger hesitated for a second and then pushed the pedals. The wheel moved, creaking, but it moved. A relieved smile spread across her face, and she looked genuinely grateful. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come by," she said, her voice tinged with relief. "You're welcome," she replied, brushing wet hair from her forehead. "It's no trouble at all. Happens to all of us sometimes." For a moment, they both stood in the rain under the shared cover of her umbrella. Neither spoke, but there was a quiet understanding, a small connection that formed without words. In that brief pause, she noticed the stranger's eyes, the way they reflected the dim light of the street, a mixture of worry and hope. It was odd how a single glance could carry so much, how someone you barely knew could suddenly feel familiar in a way that was hard to explain. Finally, the stranger shook her head slightly as if to clear away the lingering tension. "I really should get going. Thank you again. You saved me from standing here forever in the rain." She smiled, feeling an unexpected warmth in her chest. "Take care of yourself. And watch the roads, they're slippery." The stranger nodded and pushed the bike carefully, glancing back once with that same look of gratitude. Then she turned and disappeared down the street, her figure shrinking into the gray drizzle. She watched her go for a moment, the sound of the bike tires rolling over the wet pavement fading into the distance. There was something about the encounter that lingered, something that felt important, even though it was just a few minutes out of the day. She continued walking home, her steps slower than before, her mind replaying the scene. It was strange how a simple act of helping someone could leave such a lasting impression. She thought about the stranger's expression, the way she had hesitated, and then the relief that had washed over her face. It was a small story, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of life, yet it carried a quiet weight, a reminder that kindness could ripple in ways you never expected. By the time she reached her apartment, she was dripping wet but strangely content. She hung up her coat and dried her hair, but even as she settled in with a warm cup of tea, her thoughts kept returning to that rainy corner, to the stranger and her small, earnest smile. It was as if something had shifted inside her, a tiny seed of curiosity and hope planted by a simple gesture. The next morning, she found herself thinking about it again, even as she got ready for work. The encounter lingered, unusual and persistent. She wondered about the stranger, Where she had been going, what had led her to that moment, why fate had placed her there at that exact time. It was an odd thought, one she usually would have brushed aside, but this time it stayed. There was a strange comfort in wondering about someone she barely knew, a sense that the world was bigger than her routines and daily concerns. Days went by, and the memory of that rainy evening refused to fade. She began noticing small details in her surroundings that reminded her of the stranger. The way a bicycle leaned against a cafe wall, the flash of wet streets after a passing shower, even a voice on the phone that sounded faintly familiar. Each time she felt a little spark of connection, a reminder of the invisible thread that had crossed their paths. She couldn't explain why she kept thinking about it. It wasn't as if the stranger had left a message or a note. There had been no names exchanged, no promises made. Just a simple act of kindness, yet it felt monumental. She realized that helping someone, even in a small way, could leave a mark, not just on the person helped, but on the one who helped as well. It wasn't long before she started noticing other opportunities to help, small moments where she could step in and make a difference. She held doors open for strangers, offered to carry groceries for an elderly neighbor, and smiled at those who seemed downcast. She wasn't doing it for recognition or reward, but because she felt a new sense of purpose, a reminder that the world was full of people who needed help in ways both big and small. And yet, she could not shake the feeling that there was more to the encounter than just a rainy evening and a broken bicycle. There was a quiet sense of destiny, a subtle pull that made her wonder if this was only the beginning. Every so often she imagined what the stranger's life was like, where she lived, what she did, what dreams she held. It was a harmless curiosity at first, but gradually it became a persistent thought, as if her mind refused to let go. One afternoon, while sitting at her favorite cafe, she noticed a flyer pinned to the community board. It was about a local charity project, one that aimed to help underprivileged children with education and basic necessities. She paused, her eyes scanning the details. Something about it felt familiar, almost like a continuation of that rainy evening. Without fully understanding why, she made a mental note to attend. There was a pull, subtle but undeniable, as if the universe was nudging her toward something bigger. That night, before going to sleep, she replayed the events of the first encounter again. She remembered the stranger's nervous glance, the way she had almost given up before she appeared, and the small smile that had lit up her face when the wheel moved freely again. She realized that in that brief exchange, there had been a lesson, a reminder that life sometimes brings strangers into your path not just to be helped, but to guide you in ways you cannot yet see. She fell asleep with the rain tapping gently against the window, her mind filled with a quiet anticipation. It was not excitement in the usual sense, but something deeper, a sense that life had a way of connecting people for reasons that were not always obvious. And as the city slept, she dreamed of that stranger, of the small act of kindness, and of the invisible threads that had tied them together, threads that she would soon discover were part of a larger story, one that was waiting patiently for them both. The days after that rainy evening seemed to carry a quiet shift in her life. She could not stop thinking about the stranger and the strange sense of connection that had lingered after their brief encounter. Even at work, her mind wandered, replaying the scene of the crooked bicycle, the nervous glance, and the small smile that had followed once the wheel turned freely again. It was strange how a single act of helping someone could feel so weighty, so meaningful, as though it had set something unseen into motion. At first, she tried to dismiss the thoughts. After all, it was just a chance meeting, a fleeting moment in the vast rhythm of life. But the more she tried to push it away, the more persistent the feeling became. She noticed herself observing little details around the city with newfound attention. A person struggling with grocery bags caught her eye. Someone fumbling to find a bus ticket drew a sympathetic glance. She began helping in small ways, holding doors, offering directions, carrying packages. Each time she did, a strange warmth would spread through her chest, a quiet joy she could not quite explain. One evening, as she walked past the small community cafe near her apartment, she noticed a flyer pinned to the bulletin board. It was colorful, handwritten in part, and described a weekend community project aimed at helping children with school supplies and small educational workshops. She paused to read the details. There was something about it, a pull she could not name, that made her feel as though she should attend. Perhaps it was the faint echo of the encounter in the rain, or the quiet whisper of curiosity that had begun to grow inside her. She did not tell anyone about her interest in the project. She simply decided she would go. It was the sort of decision that felt spontaneous but also inevitable, like stepping onto a path already waiting for her. She marked the date on her calendar and felt a flicker of anticipation, though she could not fully understand why. The weekend arrived, and she made her way to the small community center, a modest building with worn brick walls and cheerful posters decorating the entrance. Volunteers were already bustling about, organizing tables, arranging supplies, and preparing activities. There was laughter and chatter everywhere, a mix of excitement and nervous energy. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, feeling a little out of place but also strangely at home. As she helped set up tables with pencils, notebooks, and small toys, she caught glimpses of the other volunteers. Most were friendly, smiling and chatting as they worked, and she found herself drawn into the rhythm of the activity. But then across the room she noticed a familiar figure, a young woman arranging books for one of the tables. The stranger from the rainy evening. Her heart skipped a beat. She had not expected to see her again, not like this in a place filled with purpose and laughter. The stranger looked up and met her gaze, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. For a moment neither moved, as if both were caught in the sudden weight of coincidence. Then slowly the stranger walked over, her steps careful, cautious, yet deliberate. "I didn't expect to see you here," the stranger said softly, her voice warm but tinged with surprise. "I could say the same," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. There was a brief pause, a quiet moment in which they simply observed one another. The city and the rain, the chance encounter, all felt like a thread that had led them to this point. They began working side by side, unpacking supplies and arranging the tables. At first, the conversation was light, small talk about the weather, the event, and the volunteers. But as the hours passed, the walls around their conversation softened. The stranger spoke about why she had come to volunteer, her passion for helping children, and her belief in giving back to the community. She was articulate, but her words carried a sense of honesty and sincerity that made her presence magnetic. As she listened, she realized how much the stranger's perspective resonated with her own, even though they had just met. The simple act of helping someone on a rainy evening had somehow led to this, an opportunity to meet someone whose values and intentions mirrored her own in unexpected ways. It was as if the universe had arranged their paths, weaving them together in ways neither of them could yet fully understand. The day passed quickly. Children arrived in small groups with their parents, eyes bright with curiosity and excitement. Volunteers guided them through activities, handed out supplies, and listened to their stories. She found herself drawn into the work, enjoying the laughter of the children and the shared energy of the room. The stranger remained by her side, a steady presence, occasionally catching her eye with a knowing smile or a gentle word of encouragement. During a brief break, they stepped outside for fresh air. The sky had cleared, leaving behind a soft golden light that reflected off the wet pavement. For a moment they stood silently, enjoying the calm after the busyness of the day. "You really didn't have to help me that night," the stranger said, her tone light but thoughtful. "I mean, it was just a bike." She shook her head, smiling. "I know, but sometimes the small things matter more than we think. That night, it just felt right to stop. I'm glad I did." The stranger nodded, her gaze distant for a moment. "I'm glad you did too. I keep thinking about it, actually. How a stranger could show up at exactly the right time. It made a difference. There was a quiet understanding between them, a recognition that their brief encounter had been more than a random meeting. It was a connection, subtle yet undeniable, something that neither could explain fully but both felt deeply. As the weekend continued, they found themselves working together seamlessly. They laughed over small mishaps, shared stories about their lives, and discovered common interests they had never expected. She learned that the stranger had a quiet strength, a gentle determination that inspired those around her. And in turn, she felt that her own presence offered comfort and support, creating a bond that grew stronger with each shared moment. By the end of the day, as volunteers cleaned up and children left with their parents, she realized that something significant had shifted. The encounter on the rainy street was no longer just a memory. It was part of a larger story that was unfolding, slowly and deliberately. The stranger had become more than just a fleeting figure from the past. She was now someone intertwined with her present, a companion on a journey she had not yet fully understood. They walked out of the community center together, carrying leftover supplies and chatting about plans for the next volunteer session. The air was cool and fresh, the remnants of rain still clinging to the streets, but there was a lightness in her step, a sense of anticipation that had been absent before. It was as if the small act of kindness that began on a rainy evening had opened a door to something much larger: friendship, purpose, and perhaps even destiny. Later that evening, she reflected on the events of the weekend. She thought about how fate, or whatever invisible force guided human connections, had led her to this moment. A simple decision to help a stranger had set in motion a series of events that she could never have predicted. And yet, now that it had happened, it felt inevitable, as if the universe had always intended their paths to cross. In the days that followed, she found herself replaying the weekend over and over in her mind. She thought about the children's laughter, the camaraderie of the volunteers, and the quiet moments she had shared with the stranger. Each memory carried a sense of warmth and meaning, a reminder that life often works in mysterious ways. She began looking for more ways to engage with her community, inspired by the energy and purpose she had witnessed. She volunteered at small events, helped neighbors in need, and sought opportunities to connect with others in meaningful ways. Every time she did, she felt the same quiet satisfaction, the same sense that her life was expanding in ways she had not expected. And yet, no matter how busy she became, the thought of the stranger lingered. She wondered about her life outside of volunteering, about her dreams and fears, about the moments she might be struggling through alone. She realized that their connection, however brief at first, had created a bridge between them, one that might continue to grow if they allowed it. One evening, as she sat by her window watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, she smiled to herself. Life had a way of surprising her, of bringing people together when they needed each other most. And though she could not know what lay ahead, she felt a quiet confidence that the story between her and the stranger was far from over. Something important had begun, a thread of fate that would continue to weave through their lives, guiding them toward experiences and lessons they had not yet imagined. In the end, the realization settled within her like a soft, persistent truth. Helping a stranger on a rainy night was only the beginning. It was a small gesture that carried enormous potential, a reminder that life's most meaningful connections often begin in the simplest ways. And as she prepared for the days ahead, she understood that her journey, shaped by kindness, curiosity, and the invisible hand of fate, was just beginning to unfold. The days following the community event were filled with a quiet excitement she could not shake. She found herself thinking about the stranger more often than she had expected, wondering what she was doing, how her days were passing, and whether she had been thinking about her as much as she had been thinking about the stranger. It was a strange feeling, part curiosity, part anticipation, part something deeper that she could not yet name. The universe seemed to keep nudging her. One afternoon, as she walked to the small cafe she had begun visiting more frequently, she noticed a flyer posted in the window about a weekend volunteering program. It was an environmental cleanup project at a nearby park, meant to involve community members in restoring local green spaces. The timing felt perfect, almost as if it were meant to lead her somewhere. Without hesitation, she decided she would join. When the weekend arrived, she arrived at the park early, a sense of eagerness filling her chest. Volunteers were already gathering, carrying gloves, bags, and tools for the cleanup. There was a shared energy, a quiet excitement among the group. She smiled at a few faces, exchanged greetings, and began to settle into the rhythm of preparation. Then, as she unpacked gloves and trash bags, she noticed a familiar figure moving toward her. The stranger. Her heart leapt in a way she could not explain, a mixture of surprise and relief. The stranger smiled, a soft, genuine smile that seemed to brighten the dull morning. "I didn't expect to see you here again," she said, laughing softly. "I could say the same," she replied, smiling back. For a moment they simply looked at each other, both aware of the coincidence and the subtle weight of their repeated encounters. It was beginning to feel like something more than chance, a pattern woven into the ordinary flow of life. They began working side by side, cleaning litter, planting small saplings, and tidying up the park. The work was physical, but it was satisfying. The effort brought with it a sense of purpose, and the shared experience created a quiet bond that grew with every task completed. They talked in small bursts between tasks, sharing light conversation about the weather, the park, and the other volunteers. Slowly, the conversation deepened, revealing glimpses of their personal lives, their hopes, and the challenges they faced. As the morning turned to afternoon, a sense of ease settled between them. They were no longer strangers who had met on a rainy evening. They were companions in the quiet work of building something meaningful, even in small ways. The stranger spoke about her love for nature, her desire to make a difference, and the moments in her life that had shaped her into who she was. She listened, fascinated by the sincerity in the stranger's voice, the way she described her experiences with honesty and thoughtfulness. At one point, as they carried a small sapling to its designated spot, the stranger glanced at her with a curious expression. "Do you ever feel like life puts certain people in your path for a reason?" she asked softly. She paused, considering the question. "I think it does," she replied. "Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's obvious. But I believe there are moments, small or big, that guide us toward people and experiences we need, even if we don't realize it at the time." The stranger nodded, as if agreeing silently, and then smiled, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I think meeting you that night in the rain was one of those moments." Her heart skipped. She remembered the crooked bicycle, the nervous glance, the small smile, and the sense of connection that had lingered since that night. It was strange how one simple act, helping a stranger, could create ripples that extended far beyond the immediate moment. "I'm glad I stopped," she said quietly. "It led me here, and I'm grateful for that." As the day progressed, their conversations grew more personal. They spoke about family, about childhood memories, and about the ways life had shaped them. They laughed at shared experiences, empathized with each other's struggles, and discovered shared values that went beyond the surface. Each conversation revealed a deeper layer of understanding and trust, slowly transforming their relationship from acquaintance to something more meaningful. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the park in soft shades of gold and orange, the work was nearly complete. Volunteers gathered their tools, shared smiles and thanks, and began to head home. She and the stranger lingered, sitting on a bench and watching the sunlight filter through the trees. The park, now tidied and renewed, seemed to reflect the quiet sense of fulfillment that had settled within them. "You've really made a difference," the stranger said softly, her gaze on the newly planted saplings, "not just here, but in the way you approach life. It's inspiring." She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet pride that was not boastful but content. "I think meeting you and helping you that night inspired me more than I realized," she admitted. "It made me see how small actions can grow into something bigger, something meaningful." The stranger smiled, and for a moment they simply sat in silence. The weight of the day and the subtle sense of destiny lingering in the air, the connection between them felt undeniable, though it was still delicate, still forming. In the following days, their interactions became more frequent. They texted occasionally, sharing articles about volunteering opportunities, photos of the park cleanup, and small thoughts that made each day feel lighter and more connected. She found herself looking forward to these messages, the little glimpses into the stranger's world becoming a source of quiet joy. Yet, it was not just the shared activities that strengthened their bond. It was the sense of understanding and empathy that grew between them. She noticed how attentive the stranger was to the feelings of others, how she listened without judgment, and how she offered support with genuine care. It was a rare quality, one that drew her in and made her want to learn more about the stranger's life, her hopes and the dreams she carried quietly. One evening, as they met for coffee after a long day, the conversation took a more personal turn. The stranger spoke about moments of uncertainty in her life, times when she had felt lost or unsure of her path. She spoke with honesty, not seeking sympathy but simply sharing her experiences. She listened attentively, offering gentle words of encouragement and understanding. The exchange deepened their trust, reinforcing the feeling that their connection was more than coincidence. It was a meeting of two people whose lives were beginning to intertwine. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. They continued volunteering together, exploring new ways to contribute to their community, and supporting each other in small, meaningful ways. She found herself thinking about the stranger even when they were apart, wondering how her days were going, whether she had faced challenges, and how she could help, even in small ways. The simple act of helping a stranger on a rainy evening had blossomed into something far more profound. A friendship built on shared values, trust, and the quiet understanding that they had found each other for a reason. Despite the closeness that developed, there were moments of uncertainty. Life, after all, was rarely simple. They had different opinions on certain matters, moments when misunderstandings arose and times when schedules or responsibilities pulled them in separate directions. These challenges tested the patience and resilience of their growing bond, forcing them to communicate, compromise, and navigate the complexities of their own lives alongside the connection they shared. Through it all, they discovered that the challenges were not obstacles but opportunities. Each disagreement, each moment of doubt, strengthened their understanding of each other. They learned to listen, to empathize, and to recognize that the bond they shared was not about perfection, but about presence, care, and the willingness to grow together. One rainy evening, reminiscent of the first time they had met, they found themselves walking together under a shared umbrella. The city streets glistened with reflections of streetlights, and the air carried the familiar scent of wet asphalt. She glanced at the stranger, noticing the calm and content expression on her face, and realized how far their connection had come since that initial encounter. "Do you ever think about that night?" the stranger asked softly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "All the time," she admitted. "It feels like everything started there, like fate was nudging us in that direction." The stranger nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I used to think that meeting someone randomly couldn't change much. But now, I'm not so sure. Sometimes the smallest actions can lead to the biggest changes." They walked in silence for a while, letting the rain and the quiet rhythm of their steps speak for them. It was a comfortable silence, filled with understanding and mutual respect. The kind of silence that only exists between people who are beginning to recognize their place in each other's lives. By the time they parted for the evening, there was a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. Their connection had grown deeper, stronger, and more meaningful, but there was still so much to discover about each other, about life, and about the unseen threads that had brought them together. As she returned home, she reflected on the journey so far. From a rainy night and a broken bicycle to community projects, shared laughter, and heartfelt conversations, the path they had traveled felt extraordinary in its simplicity. It was a reminder that life often works in mysterious ways, guiding people toward each other through moments of chance, coincidence, and quiet intention, and she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Their story, woven from small acts of kindness, shared experiences, and growing trust, was still unfolding. Whatever the future held, she felt certain that the encounter on that rainy evening had set into motion a journey that would continue to shape both of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. As their friendship grew stronger, life began to test them in ways neither had anticipated. At first it was small things, a missed message, a change of plans, a minor misunderstanding over responsibilities during their volunteer projects. These moments, though seemingly insignificant, carried an unusual weight. Both felt the tension, the discomfort of realizing that even people who seemed perfectly in sync could sometimes clash over the simplest matters. One afternoon, they met at the community center to organize a donation drive. The room buzzed with activity, and volunteers moved quickly between tables, sorting clothes, books, and food. She noticed the stranger focused intently on arranging items, carefully checking every detail. She approached to help, but the stranger's tone, though not unkind, carried a hint of impatience. "Can you make sure these are folded neatly?" she asked. "It will take longer if they're just stacked like that." She nodded and began folding, but a small frustration crept in. She realized that while they shared many values, they had different ways of approaching things. She was more relaxed, more willing to improvise, while the stranger preferred order, precision, and planning. For a moment, a tiny tension hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement that their differences were real. By the time they finished organizing the donations, the air between them felt a little heavy. They exchanged polite smiles but didn't speak much on the walk home. She thought about the encounter, trying to understand why something so small had affected her. It wasn't anger, not exactly, but a gentle reminder that relationships, even Those that seemed destined required patience and understanding. Over the next few days, the small tension lingered. They continued to meet for volunteer work, but there were subtle shifts in their interactions. She noticed herself choosing her words more carefully, and the stranger seemed quieter than usual, lost in thought more often. Despite the awkwardness, there was no desire to withdraw. Both felt the underlying connection, the bond that had formed over shared experiences and mutual respect. They knew that this, too, was part of the journey. One evening, she decided to call the stranger, wanting to clear the air. "Hey, I feel like there's been a bit of tension lately," she said gently. "I don't want us to let small misunderstandings get in the way of what we're building." The stranger paused on the other end of the line, then let out a quiet sigh. "You're right. I've been so focused on getting things done perfectly that I forgot the bigger picture. I didn't mean to come across as impatient." "I understand," she replied. "I think we both just care a lot, in different ways. And that's okay. We just need to remember why we're here, to support each other and the people we're trying to help." A soft silence followed, filled with understanding. Then the stranger laughed lightly, a sound that eased the tension. "You always know how to make things feel better. Thanks for saying that." From that day on, they approached their work and their friendship with renewed patience. They learned to balance their differences, appreciating the strengths each brought to the table. The stranger's meticulous attention to detail complemented her flexible, improvisational approach, and together they created something stronger than either could have done alone. Yet, as the bond deepened, life introduced challenges beyond simple misunderstandings. Both carried their own struggles, private worries they rarely shared. The stranger had moments of doubt, wondering if her efforts truly made a difference, questioning her path in life. She too faced insecurities, uncertainty about her career, fear of being left behind, and the nagging sense that life was moving too quickly. These personal challenges occasionally cast shadows over their shared experiences, testing their ability to support one another. One rainy afternoon, much like the night they had first met, they walked together after a long day of volunteering. The streets glistened with reflections from the city lights, and the rhythm of the rain felt soothing and familiar. Yet the conversation that began lightheartedly soon turned serious. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," the stranger said, her voice low. "Sometimes I wonder if all the effort I put in, if it really matters, if I'm really making a difference at all." She listened carefully, understanding the fear and doubt behind the words. "I think it does matter," she said softly. "Even the smallest actions create ripples. Sometimes we don't see the results immediately, but that doesn't mean they aren't real. You've helped more people than you realize, including me." The stranger looked at her, a faint smile breaking through the worry. "You really mean that?" "Absolutely," she replied. "I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for you, if it weren't for that night, if it weren't for the way you inspire people just by being who you are." There was a moment of silence, filled with the sound of rain and the quiet understanding between them. It was in that moment she realized that the connection they shared was not just about volunteering, shared experiences, or even fate. It was about trust, honesty, and the courage to be vulnerable with someone else. Over time, these moments of vulnerability became more frequent. They began to confide in each other about struggles they had never shared with anyone else. Family challenges, personal fears, past mistakes. Each revelation brought them closer, creating a foundation of empathy and support. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of discomfort, tears, and silence, but each challenge they faced together strengthened their bond, teaching them patience, resilience, and the importance of understanding another person fully. One day, while helping organize a fundraising event for a local shelter, the stranger hesitated at the task she had been assigned. She noticed the uncertainty and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do you need help?" she asked. The stranger looked at her, vulnerability clear in her eyes. I'm not sure I can do this the way it needs to be done. What if I mess it up?" "You won't," she said firmly but kindly. "We'll do it together. That's what matters, trying, supporting each other, and learning along the way. It doesn't have to be perfect. They worked side by side, tackling the tasks with determination, and by the end of the day, the project was complete. The sense of accomplishment was shared, not just in the results of their work, but in the realization that they could rely on each other, even in moments of doubt and fear. It was a lesson neither had expected, but one that would stay with them forever. In quieter moments, away from the busyness of volunteering, they would reflect on how far they had come. What started as a simple encounter on a rainy evening had grown into something neither could have predicted, a deep, meaningful connection built on kindness, trust, and shared experiences. And yet they both knew that challenges would continue to arise. Life was rarely without obstacles, and their bond, as strong as it was, required attention, care, and patience. One evening, after a particularly long day, they walked together along a familiar street. The air was crisp and the city lights shimmered on wet pavement. They spoke of dreams and hopes, of the future and the unknown, and for the first time, the stranger admitted a fear that had been quiet but persistent. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Scared that all of this, us, the volunteering, the connection, could change or fade away, that it might not last." She stopped walking for a moment, considering her words carefully. "Life is unpredictable," she said softly. "But what we've built, what we share, that doesn't fade because of fear. It grows when we nurture it, when we face challenges together, and when we continue to care. You're not alone in this." The stranger's eyes softened, and a sense of relief washed over her. It was a small moment, quiet but profound, a reminder that the strength of their bond did not lie in perfection but in presence, support, and the willingness to face life's challenges together. As the weeks turned into months, they continued to grow, not just individually but together. They faced difficulties, both in their personal lives and in their shared projects, but each obstacle became an opportunity to understand one another more deeply. They laughed, argued, cried, celebrated, and comforted one another. And through it all, the invisible thread of fate that had first brought them together remained, guiding them, connecting them, and shaping their journey in ways neither could fully see. By the time the seasons began to change, they had established a rhythm, a balance between individuality and shared purpose. The stranger's meticulous nature complemented her adaptability, their strengths and weaknesses creating a harmonious partnership. It was not always easy, and it was not always smooth, but it was real, grounded in trust and the understanding that life was meant to be shared, even with its uncertainties. One quiet evening, as they sat together overlooking the city from a small park, she reflected on the journey so far. The rainy night, the bicycle, the initial act of helping a stranger, it all seemed like a distant memory, yet it had set everything in motion. Without that single, simple choice, none of this would have happened. The friendship, the trust, the shared experiences, they were all products of that moment, proof that fate often works through the smallest gestures. The stranger looked at her, a soft smile on her face, and said, "I never thought a rainy night and a broken bike could lead to all of this. It feels like it was meant to be." She nodded, feeling the truth of those words in her heart. "It does, and I'm grateful for it every step of the way." And in that quiet, shared moment, they both understood that life's challenges, the trials they faced, and the uncertainties ahead were not obstacles but part of the journey, a journey that had begun with kindness and would continue with trust, growth, and the quiet understanding that they had found each other for a reason. The weeks that followed carried a sense of quiet fulfillment. Life had a rhythm now, shared volunteer projects, evening walks, occasional coffee dates, and the small but meaningful gestures that strengthened their connection. Both of them had learned to trust the invisible thread that had drawn them together, a thread that seemed to grow stronger with every shared experience. One morning, she received a message from the stranger, inviting her to a special community event at a nearby park. It was an annual celebration, meant to recognize volunteers and community members who had contributed in meaningful ways. She agreed immediately, feeling a flutter of excitement. It had been months since the rainy night that had brought them together. And this event felt like a culmination, a chance to see how far their shared efforts had reached. When she arrived at the park, the air was filled with laughter and chatter. Children ran through the green spaces, families picnicked on blankets, and volunteers moved busily between booths and tables. There was a sense of joy and accomplishment, a celebration of community and shared effort. She spotted the stranger across the lawn, arranging materials for a small stage where speeches and performances would be held. Their eyes met and a smile passed between them. Warm and familiar, they spent the morning helping wherever they were needed, guiding children to activities, distributing snacks, and assisting with decorations. It was physical work, but it felt effortless when shared with someone who understood the rhythm, who shared the same dedication and values. Every glance, every shared laugh reinforced the connection that had grown over months. Later, during a brief pause, they sat on a bench under the shade of a tree, watching the activity around them. The stranger leaned back, relaxed for the first time that day. "I can't believe how much has happened since that night," she said softly. "It feels like everything was meant to lead to this moment." She nodded, her thoughts tracing the journey that had brought them here. From a rainy evening and a broken bicycle to shared volunteer work, personal struggles and deep conversations that had built trust and understanding. "It does feel like fate," she said. "Not in the magical sense, but in the way life nudges us toward the people and experiences we need." That night, it changed everything. The stranger smiled, a faint blush on her cheeks. "I've thought about it so many times. How a single act of kindness can grow into something so much bigger. You helped me when I needed it most, and I guess I didn't realize it at the time, but it changed me too." She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet contentment that had nothing to do with accolades or recognition. "It changed me as well," she admitted. "It showed me how much impact a small action can have, and it led me to someone I care about deeply. Someone who inspires me every day." The stranger looked at her, eyes soft and reflective. "I feel the same. You've been there for me, not just in small ways, but in the moments that mattered. And I hope you know, you've made a real difference in my life." The conversation paused as the sounds of the park continued around them. Children laughed nearby, volunteers coordinated activities, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting warm patterns on the ground. In that moment, there was a sense of completeness, a quiet understanding that the journey they had shared was meaningful beyond words. As the afternoon progressed, they assisted with the final tasks of the event, helping with a small performance by local children, handing out certificates of appreciation, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. Each interaction, each shared effort, felt like a thread in the larger tapestry of their connection, weaving together months of experience, trust, and understanding. Later, as the event drew to a close, the stranger suggested a walk along a nearby path that overlooked a small lake. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink from the setting sun, and the water reflected the colors in gentle ripples. They walked side by side, sharing thoughts about the day, the people they had helped, and the impact of their efforts. "I never imagined that one night could lead to all of this," the stranger said quietly. "The volunteering, the connection, the friendship, it feels like it was waiting for us all along." She smiled, feeling a deep sense of agreement. Sometimes life works in ways we can't understand in the moment. We make choices, take small actions, and later we realize those moments were guiding us. That night helping you with your bike, it wasn't just a random act. It was the beginning of something much larger. They stopped walking and looked out over the lake, the soft light casting a golden glow over their faces. For a moment, words were unnecessary. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding, trust, and the quiet recognition of the journey they had shared. "You know," the stranger began after a pause, "I used to think fate was something only in stories, something that happens in books or movies, not in real life. But now I think it's real in its own way. It's the people we meet, the moments that change us, the choices we make." "I agree," she said softly. "Fate isn't magic. It's the way life nudges us, pushes us toward the people and experiences we need. And sometimes it's hard to see until we look back." That night, it was a turning point. For both of us. The stranger turned to her, eyes bright with emotion. "I'm glad we met. I really am." "Me too," she replied. The words felt simple, but the meaning behind them was profound. It wasn't just about meeting a stranger. It was about the bond that had grown, the lessons learned, and the understanding that life's path often brings unexpected gifts when we act with kindness and openness. As evening fell, they walked back toward the park entrance, the path lined with trees and soft lighting. They reflected on the past months, the challenges they had faced, the personal growth they had experienced, and the moments of joy that had woven their lives together. Each memory, each shared experience reinforced the idea that the encounter on that rainy night had been far more than a coincidence. When they reached the entrance, the stranger turned to her and smiled. "No matter what happens next, I want you to know. That night, that simple act of kindness set everything into motion, and I'll always be grateful for it." She felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in the stranger's words. "I'll always be grateful too," she said softly. "It showed me the power of small actions and the way life can surprise us when we least expect it. And it led me to you." They shared a quiet moment, letting the significance of their journey settle around them. It was a moment of understanding, of gratitude, and of recognition that their lives had changed in ways they could never have predicted. In the weeks and months that followed, their connection continued to grow. They supported each other through personal challenges, celebrated achievements together, and found joy in the simple moments of everyday life. The volunteer projects remained a central part of their shared experiences, but the true significance was in the bond they had formed, the trust, empathy, and understanding that had grown from a single, unexpected encounter. Looking back, she realized how small moments can shape a lifetime. That night, helping a stranger with a broken bicycle had seemed insignificant at the time, yet it had set in motion a journey of friendship, growth, and shared purpose. It had taught her about kindness, about trust, and about the invisible threads that connect people in ways that are sometimes difficult to see until later. The stranger became more than a friend. She became a mirror, reflecting the best parts of herself, challenging her to grow, and inspiring her to see life with empathy and purpose. Their bond, built on shared experiences and mutual support, was a reminder that life often works through small acts, unexpected encounters, and the courage to act with an open heart. One evening, as they sat together watching the city lights from a quiet park bench, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The rainy night, the chance encounter, the shared volunteer work, it all felt like a carefully woven story, a narrative that had unfolded naturally, guided by choices, chance, and a subtle hand of fate. "I guess life has a funny way of leading us to where we need to be," the stranger said, her voice soft and thoughtful. "It does," she agreed. "And sometimes the smallest decisions have the biggest impact." That night, stopping to help you, it changed everything. For both of us. The stranger reached over and squeezed her hand lightly. "I'm glad it did. I really am." She smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Me too. And I know this is only the beginning. Life has more to show us, more experiences, more lessons, and I'm glad we'll face them together." As the city lights reflected on the calm surface of the lake, they sat quietly, appreciating the journey, the challenges, and the connection that had grown from a single act of kindness. It was a story of fate, not in the dramatic sense, but in the way life nudges people together, in the moments that seem small but carry immense meaning, and in the relationships that shape us, often without us even realizing it. In the end, she understood that helping a stranger that night had been far more than an isolated moment. It had been the beginning of a path, a journey of shared growth, trust, and companionship. It was a reminder that life's most meaningful connections often begin in unexpected ways, through acts of kindness, empathy, and the courage to reach out to someone in need. And as they walked home together under a shared umbrella, the cool evening air brushing against their faces, she knew with certainty that their meeting had been fate in its quiet, powerful form. A single moment had changed everything, and the story of that night would live in their hearts forever, shaping the rest of their lives in ways they had yet to discover.